We are so thrilled to be launching and kicking off our 4th season of this Living Traditions series. This has been an incredible partnership with the Prime Minister's Office of Japan. Thank you so much. And as well as our friends on the East Coast, the Japan Society of New York. As many of you know, since the garden was established in 1963, one of its primary purposes has been to share Japanese culture with American audiences in a way that we understand one another a little bit better. Since this series, I love this series for doing that because it looks at modern topics, it looks at modern trends, things that we sort of almost take for granted as being a really relevant topic of the modern era, but it traces its roots back to ancient Japanese traditions that date back, centuries and even millennia. Living here in this country where we're a relatively young country in the world, we sometimes get a bit dismissive, or it can get a bit dismissive of the past. It is really humbling and illuminating, I think, to explore the wisdoms that come from historical journeys of some of the most iconic facets of Japanese culture, and doing that through these conversations between experts and cultural stewards such as our speakers here today. We're really excited to have them here. Thank you all for being here so much. In particular, Japan's reverence and respect for nature is a topic that is so relevant, and it really gives us a lot of insights into some of the most urgent and pressing topics that we face today, in particular when it comes to climate change, and I think that's you'll hear a lot more about that today. When we started Living Traditions back in 2021, we were in the heart of the pandemic, and we were doing everything by Zoom, which was fine. But it sure is good to be here together today. So thank you all for coming here, and is why we're thrilled to be here at the World Forestry Center, chosen really in part to help illustrate the importance of natural green public spaces that foster dialogue, that foster civic discourse. So thank you to our friends at the World Forestry Center, as well as other local supporters, for supporting this important conversation today. I just want to thank everybody for coming. We're so excited for this. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I look forward to meeting you, seeing you at the reception immediately following the conversation at the museum just across the way. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aki Nakanishi. I'm the director of Japan Institute, and I'm going to be your MC for this forum, actually. And of course, first off, thank you so very much for choosing to spend this beautiful Saturday afternoon with us as we roll out this amazing, exciting discussion discovering actually 101 different ways to learn from ancient wisdom, as Lisa alluded to just earlier, actually. Yeah. Ways to do that, obviously, we'll get back to how we talk about our current issues, but also sometimes by looking back in the past, we learn a great deal of wisdom as well that could be applied to some of the contemporary practices. Today, not only do we have some of the most astute speakers, public intellectual, representing our 3 core tenets of Japan Institute, that's landscapes, architecture, as well as the arts. And we have amazing speakers lined up. But not just that, we have all of you actually representing all walks of life, coming from very diverse professional backgrounds and actually coming from all corners of the world. And to that end, I wanted to just make sure that we are building a great community through cultural exchange. That's what we are here to learn. But not just that, how do we also make ourselves resilient, more resilient against natural disasters, which unfortunately do not recognize any international borders? And especially to that end, it's almost disheartening and very poignant to even think that this kind of notion and awareness of disaster preparedness is even more important and more relevant and necessary than ever because of what the friends and families down in Los Angeles are going through right now. And I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister's office, all the colleagues there, as well as friends at Japan Society in New York, when we say we share the deepest sympathies with those people who are being affected by the ravaging fires in Los Angeles right now. And speaking of Prime Minister's office, I would feel remiss if I didn't mention that Miss Maho Hamada, who's sitting right there, gracing us with her presence, came all the way from Tokyo to take this all in with us. And I just wanted to recognize her generosity here. Thank you so very much. You've been such an amazing, instrumental part of this whole journey all along, so thank you so much again. I'm going to get right to the introduction of today's keynote speaker, which I need glasses for. So, Dr. Hitoshi Abe is a professor in UCLA's Department of Architecture and Urban Design. He is also director of the UCLA Terasaki Center for Japanese Studies. He founded Atelier Hitoshi Abe in 1992, an internationally recognized design practice with offices in Sendai, in Tohoku, and Los Angeles. Known for his innovative work in architecture and urban design, Dr. Abe bridges disciplines through global collaborations. He co-founded Arcade after the 2011 East Japan earthquake and established X-Lab at UCLA, which is a think tank for exploring architecture's evolving boundaries. And I'm hugely excited and honored to have him kick off this forum for us. Ladies and gentlemen, please do join me in welcoming Dr. Hitoshi Abe.
So hello everyone, I'm Hitoshi Abe. Thank you very much for this nice introduction, and I'm so honored to be part of this event today. I wish I had been here in a different state of mind. Still, unfortunately, my heart is broken due to the horrible fire in Los Angeles that destroyed so many places that I admire. I hope that the path towards the urgent recovery can be found as soon as possible, and every victim can recover their life soon. At the moment, I'm also thinking about what I can do to contribute to this recovery, and I believe that today's talk is deeply related to what needs to be done against such a horrible disaster. Today's title is Searching for Regenerative Urbanism. Regenerative urbanism is an urban design strategy of creating disaster-resilient urban environment through harmony with nature. The idea of combining conflicting principles of disaster resilience and harmony with the nature seems like a contradiction in terms. In today's short lecture, I will present our exploration of regenerative urbanism with 11 universities around the Pacific Rim, like universities on the Ring of Fire. It all started with a great East Japan earthquake. As you know, the most massive earthquake in Japan's recorded history was followed by massive tsunami that caused extensive damage to Pacific Coast region of northern Japan. This area, home to a small community of fishermen and farmers with a high percentage of elderly residents, has been hit by such a disaster since ancient times, actually. But even for them, this was the first disaster of this magnitude in nearly 1,200 years, and it was unprecedented. In the disaster of this magnitude, what is most impressive and interesting is that the community resilience that the people of this area demonstrated, especially during the first 2 weeks, before infrastructure such as power, water, and distribution was restored. In the shelter, people helped and supported each other. Many volunteers provided help to supplement the various social systems that had ceased to function. To share limited resources, people patiently waited in the long lines and voluntarily maintained social order in the face of largest disaster in history, which killed over 20,000 people. The Japanese community showed remarkable resilience, And this is because the people of Japan, a country blessed with abundant natural resources, have historically lived side by side with the dangers of disaster. For example, of the more than 1,000 earthquake magnitude 6 or more significant events in the world from 1994 to 2003, about 23% occurred in Japan. It's kind of crazy. And then during the shogun's reign, when Tokyo was known as Edo, 49 significant fires occurred in 267 years. So practically every 5 years, most of Edo would burn down and then rebuild again. So city that repeatedly repeated itself in a 5-year cycle of destruction and rebirth. This was unsurprising since the million people lived in a city made mainly of wood and paper. In other words, the people's daily lives and the economic activity were shaped by the assumption that the city would burn every 5 years. And some interesting, unique method can be seen to live with a disaster. The reign of samurai ended with the Meiji Restoration, and Edo was renamed Tokyo. And in this era of radical modernization and westernization in Japan, one of the main goals was to create a strong, fireproof, and disaster-resilient country. The word kenchiku, which means architecture in Japanese, was coined by Chuta Ito in 1897. It may seem strange that this word was coined in the 19th century in Japan, a country that has been building architecture for 2,000 years. But in modern Japan, however, architecture referred to building made with Western technology that cannot be burned by fire. The goal was to transform a Japanese city into a Western city that could resist the force of nature. So in 1877, Ginza, the first Western-style brick town, was built. But despite the various efforts, Tokyo continued to be destroyed and rebuilt. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, with its contrasting arrangement of the atomic bomb dome, a monument in ruins, and the Peace Center, a symbol of Japanese modernism designed by Kenzo Tange, seems to symbolically represent the Japanese city that is repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt. You can see the Hiroshima Dome at the end of the arrow, and then the Peace Center at the bottom of the arrow. The image of the city undergoing repeated destruction and rebirth continued to inspire many modern Japanese architects. Historically, Japan has had several interesting ways of dealing with recurring disasters. As I mentioned, the fire was the biggest disaster in Edo. Dealing with fire was a critical issue for government and residents of that time, and various methods were used by each side. In the Great Meiriki Fire of 1657, one of the 3 major fires in Edo, most of the city, including Shogun's castle, now the imperial palace, was burned down to the ground. Hyokechi, which began to be established after Great Meiriki Fire, is very interesting as an urban planning method. Hyokechi is a vacant lot that prevents the fire from spreading to surrounding building. So it started at the 5 sites where the Great Meiriki Fire burned and gradually increased. So by the end of the 17th century, the number of hyokechi had risen to 13. So this picture shows hyokechi listed in Edo Meisho Zue, published in the 1830s. This relatively large open space located in present-day Kanda was called Yatsukoji at the time because it was situated at the intersection of the several roads. So hyokechi is also depicted in ukiyo-e woodblock printed by Utagawa Hiroshige. People coming and going and standing around and talking in this back and lot are depicted, conveying peaceful atmosphere. These ukiyo-e in the early Meiji period shows the same hyokechi. Hyokechi is very unusual back and lot that serves several functions as a buffer for fire prevention, as a street and transportation hub, and as a multiple plaza for stall operation, kite flying, festival, and other event. So this hyokechi, Yatsukoji, was repeatedly depicted by Hiroshige and other painters as a famous landmark, indicating that it was a place of high cultural value to the people of the time. The parade of the festival procession in the vacant lot during the famous Kanda festival is also preserved in the paintings. What is interesting about hyokechi is that although it is a place created by the fire, it is also the facility for disaster prevention and the public space that serves as a platform for various activities further integrated into people's lives. This is a picture of river crossing on Oi River. As shown in this picture, Japan is a country with rich culture related to water. This painting was done in 1856 and depicts the flooding of the river. Oi River was long been famous as a raging river, and when it rains heavily, river overflows, causing distress to the people who lives there. Oi River in the Edo period was divided into several branches and twists and turns as shown in the figure. The lower reaches of the Oi River were said to be one of the three most significant areas of scattered village in Japan, along with Tomai Plain in Toyama Prefecture and the Yagawa Plain in Shimane Prefecture. Scattered villages are settlements where houses are scattered and dotted across the vast plain. The homes are not scattered randomly, but are protected by natural levees and artificially constructed levees that lines the plain. This is Funagata Yashiki, boat-shaped house, a style of residence often seen in the lower reaches of Oi River that was designed to protect the house from flooding. The tip of the house is pointed towards the upstream side of Oi River, as you can see here on the picture. And on this pointed tip, an embankment about 1.5 to 2 meters high is built, and dozens of pine trees and bamboo trees are planted there. Since the bank was in the shape of the boat, it could reduce the force of water during flood, preventing houses from being knocked down or washed away. So people often built tombs on them or enshrined local deities, hoping that their ancestor or god of the house would protect their homes. They also built banks around their houses and dug ditches along the banks to prevent the water from entering them. So this ditch is usually used as an irrigation channel. So there were about 544 Funagata Yashiki in the 60s, as shown in this figure. Still, only a few remains as technologically superior levees and dams have been built. Modern levees and dams established safely by separating human life from nature of water. Scattered villages and the Funagata Yashiki, however, ensure safety, albeit imperfectly by drawing nature into the situation, creating soft boundaries, and designing them to be in harmony with human life. Let's step away from Japan and look at the world globally. This video summarizes the natural disasters happening around the world. This yellow dot indicates significant earthquake that occurred worldwide during year 2010. So this shows that the world is actually constantly shaking. This is a simulation of tsunami propagation during the Great East Japan earthquakes. We can see that the tsunami generated in Japan is natural phenomena on a global level that travels through the ocean and has significant impact on the other side of the globe. So this one shows the forest fires that occurred worldwide during the year 2009. Looking at this, it is safe to say that the earth is constantly burning. So earth systems are moving dynamically in a large cycle. Human beings form and operate within their own closed small territories. The balance can be maintained as long as the scale remains at the particular scale, but when the human settlements eventually expands to the global scale, the collision between larger circular current of nature and solid territory of human being begin to occur, manifesting as obstruction in a human realm, disasters, and the global realm, environmental destruction. So disaster and environmental destruction are two different aspects of the same problem, two sides of the same coin. Regenerative urbanism attempts to resolve this friction by weaving various human activity as a series of small systems into the large cycle of natural flow and redesigning the whole in multiple areas to circulate smoothly. Cities are part of the greater flow of nature, and the most fundamental principle of regenerative urbanism is the attitude of rethinking environmental design while taking more honest look at this fact. It does not reject nature or disasters. How can we softly accept and let them go past? This is the essential attitude in the methodology. ArcDL 3, Architecture and Urban Design Research for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resiliency, is an international collaborative project led by UCLA, Tohoku University in Japan, in partnership with the Association of the Pacific Rim Universities, and involving 11 universities along the Pacific Rim. Based on the concept of regenerative urbanism, each university sets local issue and proposes an urban design that reflects its own situation towards a society that can cope the disasters. By defining regenerative urbanism, each university's vision of the future overlapped. So we raise the resolution of today's pluralistic and fluid vision of future. The themes of each university were classified into 4 categories according to the types of disaster: earth, water, fire, and complex. Sorry, maybe it's hard to read this. Through the issues presented by each university, we can see how natural phenomena around the globe manifest themselves as different disasters in a different regional context. So it was a 3-year initiatives followed by this timeline. And it was during the pandemic. But so we had to shift everything into online. But actually, I must say that it encouraged the communication with the university, outside of your own country. So the global kind of communication and education kind of worked online more smoothly. As a culmination of this international joint project, the Regenerative Urbanism exhibition was actually held in Nihonbashi, Tokyo 2022, and then traveled to Japan House in Los Angeles 23. The ideas for disaster resilient city developed by universities were categorized and organized into 7 types, which were reconfigured and displayed in the exhibition as a journey through 7 regenerative cities. So the 7 regenerative cities presented in this exhibition are hydroactive city, which is integrated with a water cycle, coexist with a flood and drought. Biophilic city is where human and plant and animal work together to create the urban life form. Pyroactive city, where the design of the boundary brings balance to forest fire and urban life. Nomadic city is a resilient urban life that responds to change in the natural phenomena. Archipelagic city forms a disaster-resilient urban network that has evolved from concentration to dispersion. Chronosystematic city creates a scenario for urban survival built on the theme of time. And lastly, the dialogic city resists disasters through dialogue and collaboration. So in the exhibition, the world's image of disaster is projected on a giant screen overhead in the whole exhibit. And 7 wells of pneumatic structure were installed with a story of 7 futuristic cities projected on the bottom of the well you look into. The entrance to the venue, the visitor will learn about the concept of the regenerative urbanism. Disaster worldwide were projected on a large screen suspended from ceiling. There were 7 wells. Visitors will walk around and immersively experience the story of 7 regenerative cities. Image and sounds start playing when you look into the first city's well.
Hydroactive city. Sponge-like urban and rural surfaces have dynamic interactions with storms, floods, and droughts to create an ecosystem interlocked with water cycles. As of now, many coastal cities around the world have been confronting risks caused by water-related disasters such as catastrophic floods, storm surges, guerrilla rain, and tsunamis. In order to respond to these water-based threats, which are increasing in severity from global climate change, we must reconstruct the relationship between cities and water. The first regenerative urban strategy introduced here is the hydroactive city, which tells a story of coexistence between 2 different platforms, the water domain, such as rivers and oceans, and the human habitat, which are drastically redefined and reorganized at micro and macro scales.
So 3 students' projects were selected to represent each city.
Rogue water infiltrating the city is not the only concern. The depletion of water resources due to drought and population growth is also an urgent issue for many cities. The filtering landscape of the hydroactive city is a designed environment with a sponge-like landscape that absorbs, cleanses, stores, and distributes excess water from storm surges and floods, creating an urban landscape that adapts to both an abundance of water from floods and a shortage of water from droughts. A reservoir, which also serves as a green space, is built around a riverbank to control flooding from rivers. A water filtration system is embedded in the sloped hill from the residential area to the riverbank in the lowlands. In the residential zones, rainwater is efficiently collected through a porous ground surface, such as residential yards and green zones, then purified through biofilters embedded in the landscape before reaching storage reservoirs. The green belt that weaves its way through the entire district is not only a strategy for water catchment, it also doubles as a public amenity that enriches urban life. The reservoir hosts numerous educational facilities where residents can learn about the water environment and the processes occurring in their neighborhoods. Following topography, an integrated water purification network is envisioned as a filtering landscape unique to the hydroactive city. Residents no longer regard water as a threatening component. Instead, it becomes a vital resource for the urban environment. New industries and alternative urban lifestyles are born from a symbiosis between water and the city.
The students started to speculate on certain kind of hybrid infrastructural buildings that I think became very, very interesting, that might deal with perhaps the issue of water through, again, the lens of the food production, but while generating energy. So in a way, there was a discourse of the kind of circular economy that was embedded in all the projects, basically, as a result of this understanding of the site and the different fluxes and
aquatic settlements. By viewing sea level rise as an opportunity along the seashore of the hydroactive city, we can create a new residential typography in which water and people coexist. The people in this area have been involved in the fishing industry. However, traditional fishing and aquaculture practices have been declining due to problems more complex than rising sea levels, such as the changing ecosystem caused by global climate change, depleting resources, and marine pollution resulting from population growth. People migrating towards the ocean to the aquatic settlements established an actual live-work scenario where fishing facilities are integrated with floating villages and marketplaces. The aquatic settlements integrate water cycles and sea level fluctuation more intimately into their lives and reconstruct the production and distribution system on the boundary of water and land. The seawalls used to divide the sea from the human habitat and protect the land from tsunamis and storm surges have become an infrastructure for generating renewable energy using seawater and solar power. The aquatic settlements establish a new starting point for aquatourism, revitalizing the local fishing community and providing economic diversification for new local businesses.
The students' strategy in this project is to kind of giving up all this man-made protection and try to utilize more ecological way to transform this man-made diets or this fixation of the coastline into more ecological way and to coexist with the natural disaster.
Then after the first video, you move to second well.
Pyroactive city. Seasonal changes of the surrounding ecosystem establish a life on the edge where disaster and humanity maintain a symbiotic coexistence. In the pyroactive city introduced in this well, ideal wildfire conditions exist, such as a hot, windy, dry climate, abundant fuel from vast shrublands and forests, and rugged mountainous terrain. People's lives and property are under constant threat by seasonal wildfires. They've established unique disaster mediation zones, creating a harmonious relationship with the natural environment, while suppressing potential wildfires at the interface between the residential zones and forest. Edited edge. The edited edge is parallel to disaster prevention adjustment bands between the wildland and residential areas. Each has a unique function that allows devastating forest wildfires to coexist with the urban community. In the wild-adjusted zone bordering the wildlands, citizens participate in clearing the undergrowth and dead shrubbery daily to reduce the amount of available fuel. The active community involvement in wildland management creates a healthy and symbiotic relationship between people and nature, instead of a confrontational defensive strategy trying to separate them. The urban adjusted zone is characterized by its unique artificial landscape constructed with non-combustible materials, solar panels, and vertical wind turbines. This zone not only functions as an efficient buffer protecting the adjacent residential area from fire, but also transforms the natural phenomena into usable energy. The farmers market and recreational facilities are also located in the urban adjusted zone, supporting a convenient and comfortable urban life and enhancing interaction among people in the community.
One of the interesting example was that they tried to sort of redefine the boundary between sort of a wild-urban interface and the actual wildland. And some of them actually, one of the students created urban adjusted and wild adjusted to be inserted between the wild and the wild urban interface. And those area works as a kind of buffer zone. And it's a new zoning system to also somehow bridges the human activity and the nature in a different way.
Agri-built. The agri-belt is an agricultural area located in the mountains that is highly prone to wildfires. Farming practices increase soil water retention by increasing plants' organic matter and moisture levels during the wildfire season. Proper arrangement of farmlands can be designed to improve wildfire resistance on a regional scale. The agri-belt is home to hotels, markets, wineries, and other local industries that establish an autonomous regional economy through tourism. An intercommunal dialogue is strengthened with public facilities, such as community centers and parks, while indoor-outdoor classrooms help to nurture a new regional culture, uniting disaster prevention, agriculture, and tourism.
In response to that, thinking about a positive evolutionary trend rather than the current negative evolutionary trend is to think about ways in which we can think about habitat management, think about improving biodiversity in ways that would reduce the chances of fire recurrence.
So we tend to think of cities as fixed and permanent existence. Perhaps this is because we think of the city as foundation that supports society based on the Western dichotomic concept of the man-made versus nature. The human world as a safe and a protected environment against the ever-changing and unstable world of nature. In reality, this is not the case. City is part of nature, and nature is also part of the city. The city and nature, which are generally considered opposite, are, in fact, strong complements of each other. And it is necessary to consider all environment as part of continuous large cycle. Recognizing this, when considering how to deal with a disaster, it should be impossible in principle to cut off nature to protect the city, since city is essentially part of it. However, it can be said that the approach to disaster management to date has been to separate the nature from the human environment in principle and silo the environment. This has given rise to the perception that the earthquake, fire, floods are negligence and accident that must be corrected or eliminated, leading to the elimination of the nature. Again, underlying concept of the regenerative urbanism is to rethink environmental design from point of recognizing that the city are part of the greater flow of nature. We must redesign the environment in various areas so that the entire environment can smoothly circulate. By doing so, we can create an environment that is close to nature's original state, while at the same time securing the stable residential area that humans desire. This approach is similar to Japan's pre-modern disaster prevention design, which the country has been continuously exposed to disasters. So now, ARCDR 3 ended 2022, but we are now thinking about moving it on to the next step. So in this next step, we intend to integrate not only the paradigm of disaster, nature, and environment, but also the paradigm of human body and well-being. So let's see what we can do to change the urban design and the environmental design. Thank you very much for listening.
Professor Abe, thank you so very much for the tour de force of keynote presentation. There's so much to unpack right there for us to even try to wrap our heads around. A lot of cases, also thought experiments, but I'm really glad some of those will be addressed and further explored in the panel discussion later on. So the second speaker that we have is somewhat of a known quantity around here, actually. Sadafumi Uchiyama is a fourth-generation Japanese gardener and a registered landscape architect based here in Oregon. As chief curator of Poland Japanese Garden and the inaugural director of its International Japanese Garden Training Center, he shaped its vision and programs for nearly 2 decades before retiring in 2024. Now working full-time through his international design build practice, Uchiyama continues to promote Japanese garden culture worldwide. A recipient of Japan's foreign minister's commendation, he regularly lectures and teaches across Japan, United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, fostering connections and advancing public education on Japanese landscape design principles. Ladies and gentlemen, please do welcome our very own Sada.
Good afternoon. Again, thank you, Aki, and thank you for Professor Abe for great introduction. I have learned a lot in such a short time. So today's topic, regenerative cities as a model, an ideal sort of model, makes me think about the paradise. And when I think about paradise, I think of gardens. Traditionally, and since the ancient time, the gardens were largely created in the image of heaven, paradise. In a Christian world, it was Garden of Eden. In the Islamic world, paradise. In ancient Greece, Arcadia. Shangri-La in China, and Pure Land, or Jodo in Japan. So in many respects, the gardens were a necessary place for spiritual refuge that served people across the cultural spectrum. In other words, the gardens are universal patterns of cultural significance and meaning. The garden is a reference point to remind us of our true self, of who we are, and where we belong. Like the regenerative cities model Professor Abe just shared with us, my contribution to this discussion is about gardens, as you expect. The gardens that restore us, mend our soul, and make us stronger as a result in a time of upheaval. So in my offering this afternoon, I would like to share 2 remarkable events in Japanese history that demonstrate how people emotionally coped with a disaster in this remarkable way. The disasters in these cases are not the natural disasters, but instead the social unrest and the warfare. So first we travel back to the 15th century in Kyoto during Ashikaga shogunate and Onin Civil War. The picture here is, as you well know, the golden pavilions, and the pictures on the upper left is the powerful third shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu. So Yoshimitsu achieved prosperity in the Muromachi period. So you can see his face is confident, powerful, and strong. So this is the height of Ashikaga period at the third shogunate. So next one, unlike his predecessor, the Yoshimitsu, this is upper left is 8th shogun Yoshimasa was in power during the time when Ashikaga shogunate was in decline. It was the worst time in the history of Kyoto. That is the Onin Civil War. In just the 10 years, the city of Kyoto was literally burned down to ashes in just 10 years. And despite his position, Yoshimasa, he was a supreme military commander. He took refuge instead into the garden of Silver Pavilion, the picture in the middle. And he exclusively devoted himself to aesthetic pursuit, such as architecture, visual art, tea, flower arrangements, etc. This silver pavilion, Yoshimasa's silver pavilion, was never decorated with the actual silver leaf. This silver meaning this is an ironic metaphor comparing the golden age and dark period of Ashikaga time. Interesting enough, while Yoshimasa was largely seen as weak and broken leader, it was his vision and determination that ultimately saved and defined some of the most cherished art form of Japan. It is worth noting that the wake of the worst destruction in the history of Kyoto coincides with the cultural renaissance of what we call Higashiyama bunka today. So tea, flower arrangement, garden making, all those things actually owed to this particular period. It's so ironic, but without this epoch, we do not have the cultures we share today with you. So fast forward 400 years, this is in 1942, Manzanar internment camp was created to retain Japanese and Japanese Americans during the World War II. Now well known, these gardens of peace were built at the Manzanar camp by incarcerated Japanese Americans in the face of racism and wartime hysteria. In my mind, these gardens are the ultimate symbols of hope and resilience. The building these gardens, you can imagine in up-high desert with no or almost no or very little vegetation, was an extraordinary effort, let alone growing the vegetable for their food. Another remarkable part of this history is that these gardens were built in a very short order of time, between 1942 and 44, just about 2 years. So what that means is that these people in the internment camp, almost 3 months into the camp open, started building these gardens. why gardens? I still think about and contemplate why garden. So it was an extraordinary effort to build not just one, actually multiple gardens in almost all 10 internment camps scattered around the West Coast. So Manzanar today is a National Historic Site managed by National Park Services. And since 2007, thanks to hundreds of volunteers, over 20 Manzanar gardens have been restored. Each garden of these 20 was built and served for a restorative purpose, and each in its own unique way. So this is my last slides. And by the way, January 18th today, yesterday, January 17th, was the 30th anniversary of Hanshin Awaji earthquake in Kobe, some of you. So we have, last year, just the year before, January 1, there was the earthquake in Hokuriku areas. And before that was 2011 in earthquake and tsunami. So these pictures you can see that's a pine tree. Among approximately 70,000 pine trees that once stood along this shoreline in Iwate Prefecture. This is the last one survived. There's one pine tree that survived that tsunami caused by the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011. The 80-foot pine tree was 173 years. So you can see building behind, and the big building was completely destroyed. Somehow 1 out of 70,000 pine trees survived. It survived a year and a half after the disaster. So 2012, the pine tree died. But it's been preserved and maintained as a symbol of recovery effort. In addition, a few more public memorials in the form of Japanese gardens are under construction right now in northern Japan of Tohoku. So in closing, I want to leave you with the idea that the garden is remarkably elastic and generous creation that has the capacity to both generate and absorb our feelings in time of joy and more in spite of tremendous sorrow. In short, the garden makes an otherwise hostile environment more humane and more hospitable. I believe the gardens are foundational to regenerative cities. It will serve us well to center around the garden and the green spaces, and it will thoughtfully weave them into urban fabric to mend our broken hearts and our weary soul. This commitment will make us stronger, wiser, and more in touch with what sustains our lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Uchiyama, for that powerful historical journey you took us on, and really look forward to seeing the panel, taking a deeper dive into some of the presentation topics that you shared with us very generously. Thank you so much. Last but not least, our third presenter is Dr. Frank Feltens. Some of you may recall the 2022 Jun Kaneko exhibition where he was guest curator, did a fantastic job helping us wrap our heads around the world vision of one of the most famous Japanese-American artists alive today. That was a fantastic exhibition. He has returned to Portland. Today he's actually wearing multiple hats, playing dual roles actually as a presenter as well as a panel moderator later on. And he's going to be helping us sort of connect all the amazing poignant thoughts that we've been discovering actually the past 1.5. Let me get to his introduction. Dr. Feltens is Curator of Japanese Art at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C., and holds a PhD in Japanese art history from Columbia University. With experience at institutions like MoMA New York and the Nezu Museum in Tokyo, which is our partner organization in Tokyo actually, he has curated acclaimed exhibitions including Hokusai, Mad About Painting, and Mind Over Matter, Zen in Medieval Japan. Dr. Feltens is also an accomplished author with works such as the one on Ogata Korin, which I absolutely adore, and his latest book, Imagine Neighbors, Visions of China in Japanese Art. Without further ado, please, ladies and gentlemen, please do join me welcoming Dr. Frank Feltens.
Thank you, Aki, for this really kind introduction. Now I just need to know how to pull up the slides. Just the next, okay, and the next, okay, perfect. Yeah, I want to keep this brief, but I did want to offer you a little bit of a historic deep dive into the way that resilience has really been a part of Japanese culture for the longest time. And I'm kind of trying to wrap up a little bit of the touch points that Professor Abe and Mr. Uchiyama have touched upon. Japanese culture has experienced a range of natural and man-made disasters, partially prompted by the country's geographical location along 4 tectonic plates, and partially also through mainly domestic struggles for power that all too often laid the country in ruins. In the wake of such looming dangers, Japanese culture has embraced cataclysms as not only negative, but as generative forces for cultural advancement. The inevitability of periodic catastrophe has spawned an attitude that I think can be described as both accepting and also defiant at the same time. Catastrophes, fissures, and such were viewed as a fact of existence, like Professor Abe was explaining too, and as an opportunity for actively enacting personal, societal, and cultural evolution at the same time. Disasters were not passively received, but actively channeled into growth. And I want to offer some first-rate accounts that underline those points. Take, for example, this iconic quote, the first lines of the famous Tales of the Heike, which some of you may have read. The text is meant to be chanted, so I will save you my chanting voice. I will just read it out. The Jedavana bells ring of the passing of all things. Twin salt trees white in flower declare that great man's certain fall. The arrogant do not long endure, they are like a dream one night in spring. The bold and brave perish in the end, they are as dust before the wind. And I always get moved when I hear those lines, and I'm kind of, living in DC, I'm often reminded of the nuances of this statement. The anonymous writer of the epos wrote these lines around the early 1300s, recounting a devastating civil war that occurred 100 years before his time in the 12th century. The so-called Genpei War rekindled Japanese society forever by shifting the political power from the court to the warrior elite. The Genpei War was followed by natural calamities as well, droughts, earthquakes, floods. So not only did it upend the country's political elite power structure, it also impacted the lives of virtually everyone. I want to cite another work, and these are the first lines of the famous Hojoki book, which is basically a first-hand account of this very war, written in 1212. The flowing river never stops, and yet the water never stays the same. Foam floats upon the pools, scattering, reforming, never lingering long. So it is with people and all their dwelling places here on earth. These words are kind of a classical synopsis of an attitude that I think pervades Japanese culture throughout centuries and still is very much in existence today, one of preparedness, both mental and physical, resilience and strength, one that understands and accepts the reality of disasters without capitulating to them, but instead understanding them as inevitable and as opportunities for cultural and personal advancement. The Genpei War helped spawn new popular religious movements, for example, that helped diversify the religious landscape of Japan while offering a decidedly democratic menu of touchstones for all people at the time and after. The 12th century civil war, along with the fractionalization of Japan at the time and after, opened a space for a staggering number of new religious movements. Evangelists traveled across the country proclaiming that reciting the Buddha Amitabha's name with all your heart alone would ensure rebirth in the Pure Land. And this image here from our collection shows that land that you would be reborn in. In other words, these movements took the exclusive dominion over the Buddhist faith away from elite monasteries and placed the agency directly with each practitioner, reassuring them that their personal faith and their personal agency alone would be enough to ensure their transfer into this paradise, so to speak. Disaster and cultural advancement continues like a red thread throughout Japanese traditional culture, and as we have heard from our two presenters today, it is still very much alive today. Likewise, another major civil war that ravaged Japan during much of the 16th century resulted in the unification of the country into one single organism. And I want to offer an example of this cultural growth as well here. One of the period's most striking artistic innovations is the Rinpa movement, and I'm biased because this is my field of expertise. Honami Koetsu, in collaboration with others, took pieces of classical Japanese literature and created the first ever printed copies of them. In the process, they effectively collapsed the centuries-old ownership over classical manuscripts by the court and made these texts available to anyone who could afford buying a book, which cost often not more than lunch. Rising levels of literacy through better education also, and widespread prosperity helped in making literature democratic for the first time in Japanese history. I would argue that this feat and many others like it would have been impossible without the cataclysm of war and catastrophe that preceded it. And finally, I want to close by offering another example that shows how cultural resiliency in Japan can not only be found on the macro level of large societal shifts, but also on the micro level of broken shards. The technique called kintsugi developed in Japan around the 15th century and allegedly gained prominence after damaged, highly valuable Chinese tea bowls were sent back to China for repairs. They returned with metal staples here on the right on the screen, which horrified their Japanese owners. Though I'm not casting any value judgment, I actually like this type of technique as well, but this is beside the point. What is on point is that this experience prompted a search for a different method. Japanese craftsmen began developing a new method of repair that would not only transform breakage, but effectively alter and often enhance the aesthetic of the broken object. As most of you will know, probably also from the current exhibition at the Portland Japanese Garden, which I encourage you to see for different kinds of kintsugi, the technique involves joining broken pottery shards using lacquer sap that is mixed with gold or silver. The sap itself is toxic when wet, but benign when hardened. The final result emphasizes rather than disguises the history of breakage, creating shimmering veins of precious metal that trace the object's wounds. Its history becomes really imprinted onto the object forever. In other words, fissures and breakages are not ignored or concealed. They are celebrated, retraced, and reformulated into something fresh, new, and appealing. In other words, the wounds are made, the scars are made beautiful, and they are being shown and celebrated. Today, kintsugi maintains its relevance both as a traditional craft and as a metaphor for embracing transformation in Japan. It is also a popular export, and companies in the US and elsewhere offer kintsugi kits that use resin instead of the toxic lacquer sap, so you don't get a rash on your hands or elsewhere. But all in all, these examples, I think, serve to underline the key points raised by Professor Abe and Sadafumi Uchiyama before, and kind of add a little bit of a historic capstone onto the theme of resilience and renewal that is so central to Japanese history and its present. So thank you all very much for listening. Please stay because we are moving to the panel discussion now, and this is going to be for about 15 minutes, and then afterwards we would invite you to ask questions to us. So think about those questions already. Thank you. Okay, so I get to ask the questions and I'm not answering any, so I would like to start with Professor Abe with my first question, and I was really inspired by hearing about your work in regenerative architecture, and you cited a few sort of concrete examples, but it feels that moving from an idea, from a concept to reality always takes different steps. So I wanted to ask you as a first question, what does it take to bring your ideas to life and to realize them in the real world?
Yeah, you just started with the most difficult question.
Of course.
Actually, the similar concept is already applied to the reconstruction of Tohoku area, northern part of Japan after the earthquake. And what happened is that the tsunami of that magnitude was so big. It happens maybe every 1,000 years. And then, so they categorized the tsunami into two. L1 is a tsunami happens in a frequency of 100 years. And L2 happens in frequency of 1,000 years. The question is, if you build the seawall against this L2 tsunami, is it feasible? Because you have to build incredibly huge seawall or whatever. So instead, they said, let's just give up for this one. Let's just prepare the seawall maybe for the L1 only, and then let the big tsunami come into certain area. So they started to actually change the urban planning so that many of the coastal area is now defined to be agricultural and also recreational, and then maybe light industry. So there's no residential. So they started to create this layer of zoning to absorb the power of the nature and let it go. So it's not perfectly the perfect example of regenerative urbanism, but the spirit is kind of shared. Also, there's a couple of projects in US also to protect the Manhattan. The Big U project by BIG architect is also an interesting example of integrating sort of a dike into the urban infrastructure, and then the park and so on are actually inviting water to come in when the sea level rises. So there are also other examples of using, the oysters actually to be grown and to protect a certain coastal area as well. So it's kind of coming. So, but the thing is, we already created this kind of society and the technology based on this kind of perception that I talked about. Even Japan changed the whole strategy at the Meiji Restoration. So it's really difficult to kind of go back, and even this, issue of fire and all these things, still, I think a lot of discussion, and but we have to try one by one, starting with a small project, I think.
So it sounds to me that in certain areas the regulatory framework, the sort of the politicians' incentive to implementing these innovative projects is there.
Yes, but that also takes a lot of energy. Even this project in Manhattan was initiated during the Obama administration as a kind of a big competition initiated by this, I think he was German or Dutch, actually Dutch, sort of a thinker. And then so it took lots of intellectual power and political power to make it work. So, and it's still taking, right? It started when Sandy hit. So it's taking quite a long time already.
Have any of your projects been realized? Or are you working on something that might be of interest to us?
It's a good question. And I worked on so many sort of, reconstruction project, but it's mostly working on how we can rebuild the lost community. And in a way, we try to find the formula that how people who move to social housing can regenerate their social relationship with others. Because as you could see, I mean, in the picture, their strength was in the community and resilience within it. But now they have to move and then relocate it, then how can we actually encourage them to do it? So I think that's also important part of the idea of regenerative urbanism.
Thank you. Now I would like to move to Mr. Uchiyama with a question that I always wanted to ask, actually. So this is completely self-serving in a way. And it's a little bit of a pivot away from the actual application to a more philosophical idea about Japanese gardens, because I've always kind of thought of Japanese gardens as sort of hyper-realistic versions of actual nature, something that through extreme really human intervention turns nature into an most ideal probably version of itself, you could say. But I was always wondering, why do we still feel this kind of natural connection to a Japanese garden, particularly here in Portland? Every time I step into the space, it feels like this is, it doesn't feel unnatural in the slightest. If that makes sense, I was wondering about your own thoughts about that.
Okay, yeah, that's another good question, and I've been sort of pondering that question as well. It's one of those natural, and with the notion of natural, that means the grass grows and trees grows and just leave it as is. And the Japanese garden, on its appearance, is quite opposite. But my thinking is it's about less to do with appearance, but more to do with our relationship with the garden. Just like we need to be with the nature. We just can't fight. We won't win. So I think I would say maintenance or care went into the garden. That's the ones I believe people are feeling and sensing in a beautiful way. So this beautiful way is very important. In a beautiful way, allow us in a very gentle way to think deep. So really, just like in a church and shrine and temples, their structure, they are not the sort of the object for the worship themselves, but actually it's an entryway or make people think. So the garden, I think, is the same way. And the garden, meaning in the form of garden, it requires very significant effort to keep it beautiful. And there is an order. So this is important part, that when we sense the order, that's a very first step to kind of calming our sort of unusual sort of feelings and distress. So I think appearance is one thing, but the relationship we feel, we sense. And the same thing like dealing with a natural disaster, it's just you have to be working with. We have to be friend with. And so it's the garden as a sort of learning tool, just to remind us of sort of you have to maintain this relationship. So that's, but it's important in a beautiful way. So that's a big important part. Beauty is a very special feeling and special word. We've been treasuring for centuries and thousands of years. because we tend to dismiss the word beauty, but the simple and the most common, everyone knows, that's actually important. That's something to do with the human survival. I had a discussion actually with an anthropologist at the Duke University, and he totally agrees. The simple words beauty is absolutely important and essential.
I couldn't agree more. I think we need we all need these kinds of lessons in our lives. And I was going to ask you about sort of specific lessons that we could take away from, interacting with spaces like that. Do you have anything to offer in addition to what you said already?
I think always it's one of those, when we do design or in particular building the garden, it's one word always cross my mind, and every single time is the moderation. That means the greatest gardener knows the best that he or she doesn't know. So it's a moderation. You make efforts the best you can, but you know you don't know. That's where you stop. That's where you let go. So basically, largely, garden appears as a sort of very superficial, very detailed, but in a very important way, things are left alone, right, for the nature to take care. So I think a moderation that's what my suggestion. It's a good way to think and see things and work with moderation.
Thank you. So before we open the floor up for the Q&A, I wanted to ask one last question, and I wanted to pivot away from the philosophical side to a more practical point. And you obviously live in LA, and here in Portland a few years ago there was also a number of disasters that happened, and they happen around the world. But what can people do? Is there any advice you can give people to be more prepared?
Asad-san mentioned about the maintenance. Right. Maintenance of the garden, meaning actually the human needs to commit to the flow of the nature. And that's very important actually to think about the fire prevention. Like in the ancient time, actually, people were actually burning. They were doing prescribed burning to make sure so that there's no fuel in a very drought season and so on. So people need to be involved, especially to design the boundary between future and human settlements. But you're talking about tips, right? So one thing is like against the fire, the last maybe 2 years, 3 years, we've been inviting many experts on the fire, and then did the interview asking, many questions. And then one shocking fact that I learned is, if you look at the actually burned area in LA, then you see all the buildings are in ashes and there's only foundation. But then you might notice actually all the trees are actually standing. The kind of strange that if you look at those pictures, Altadena or, the Palisade, funny thing is that it's a forest fire, but in the city, only houses are burned and all the the street trees and so on are standing, mostly green, maybe little, black, but the fact is the house is more flammable than the tree. So the fire might started in the forest, but then as it came down to the city, then it starts to burn only houses because of the fact that people don't really maintain the house in a proper way. For instance, the old leaves on the rain girder needs to be removed because that's when the amber comes in, that's ignite the whole fire. And also many people keeps like junks and flammable things besides under the eave, right? But that's also when the amber comes in, the corner under the eave catch the fire. And then the fire reaches to this eave and then comes into the house. So in a way, there's many ways in a day-to-day life to be sure so that there's no flammable stuff around your house. And then also you need to maintain, again, the trees in your garden to just make sure so that you can keep your even house as it is can be more fire resilient. Was it a good tip?
That's perfect. A very good tip. I live in a condo, but I don't. But still, but I think everybody finds it applicable, and it's kind of the gist of it is tidiness is the key to.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I don't know. The earthquake tip is different one. Like, what do you need to keep in your bed? There's a two thing. Oh no, three now. Three things you have to keep. One is very obviously the cell phone, right? Charged. The other two, one is your shoes. Then the other one is kind of a whistle. Because the reason of the shoes is most of the severe injury and the people who are heavily damaged get injured by stepping onto the broken glass. So when the earthquake happens, if you keep the shoes beside the bed, you can wear it. And it's usually dark and you don't know what you're gonna step onto. And if you hurt yourself that way, it's very much impossible to run away. So the shoes. Whistle this is more Japanese case. So in case that the whole house collapses and you are buried under, but most likely you will be still alive. And then in Japan, they will take a week looking for you. So in that week, you want to be found, right? But screaming won't last. So it's always easier to whistle, and then people can find you. So cell phone, whistle, and shoes. Okay, if you're worried about the earthquake.
Thank you. I think everybody can relate to that. As a final close-up, I want to give both of you the opportunity to send us on our way with a final comment. Sada, if you could.
I think I just to say the same thing, the moderation, and it just there's no end what we want to get and what we get. Just we have to leave things, something, doesn't need to be a lot. And just I'd like to just quickly comment, in not today, but there used to be in my home, way in rural Japan, the New Year's, we stop using the kitchen, car, and everything. And whole family stay in a single room. And eating 3 days the meal that already we cooked before New Year. So the kitchen can take a break. So again, it's a small things, but again, it's a moderation. And, so I read, that's read a comment from the seasoned gardener.
And a comment that I think we should all take seriously. Professor Abe, one last comment.
So past 1 week was very crazy, and I was in also, in very tense situation because many people also talking about what we can do to help. And so I was in a meeting on Zoom today even talking about architects gathering and so on, and then because of my past experience, I feel like I can do something, but still I know we need to be very careful and trying to strategize. And so preparing for today's conversation was very helpful to kind of, again, to review what we've been doing and what I've been doing. But also, first of all, I should say that it was very nice to get out from the context, being in this nice place, and then spending time in a garden, and then just trying to kind of going back to where I started, and then I will go back to LA tomorrow, and then I guess hopefully we can come up with better way to help. That's it. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, and thank you all so much. It's always wonderful to be in Portland. I don't have any wisdom to impart. I will fly back to the other side of the country tomorrow, and we have a big day coming up on Monday. So I'm sure we will see each other again. Thank you so much for coming.